Okay, let's get going.
Right.
Okay, so welcome to this episode of our panelists, and I'm very pleased to have Nick Fereday joining us to be interviewed and talk to us about what's going on in the world of food.
Thank you.
So, Nick spent 15 years as executive director of food and consumer trends at Rabobank, where his talking points commentary became essential reading for food industry leaders. During his 30-year career, he has advised major food companies, investors, and entrepreneurs, and his insights have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and leading food industry publications. Personally, I found them extremely interesting, sometimes provocative, but always fact-based. So I'll be asking Nick about what's going on in the world of food, but also let me introduce a couple of other folks who will be chiming in, and that's our CJB team, Roberto Pineda and Maria Castro. And the reason I asked them to join too is because they do a lot of the product development for CJB for our clients. And as Nick talks about what's going on in the world of food, they may chime in and say, for example, yeah, you're talking about protein. Here's some of the challenges we may have formulated with protein. So bringing it down to the real world. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the interview with you, Nick.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the invite. Very much appreciated.
Of course. So let's start off with a more general area and talk about what you see as the biggest health trends that are reshaping food and beverage. Certainly in your insights letters, you talk about major shifts. So let me give you a chance to
Yeah,
tell
well,
us
good
straight.
one. I mean, anything I think I say won't come as revolutionary. And you use the title Megatrends at the start, which is kind of, sometimes sounds ambitious, but I think you're right, because I think if we lumped like three trends together, we could certainly get a megatrend. And those three trends may be the rise of the GLP-1 medication, so this kind of external influence, medical influence on food, the Maha movement, and for the first time we have in a long, long time, government policy is part of the mix. For the longest time, food companies, I'm going to say, could ignore or not worry about what's going on in Washington or the states, and certainly all that's changed in the last 24 months. And the third one is the one that I know gets under your skin, Carlos, is this whole ultra processed foods and that debate as well. And the reason why I would put them all together is because in some ways they're all kind of pointing in the same direction in terms of where they want to go. You know, to avoid packaged foods or highly processed foods, consumers who are taking GLP-1 drugs find food tastes differently and are being urged to eat different kinds of foods than what we're used to, which again leads to more fruits and vegetables and more, the buzzwords around nutrient-dense food. And then, of course, the MAHA movement, where the actual website itself for the new dietary guidelines is eat real food. And so in some ways they're all from different angles, from policy, from drugs, and from how we choose to define food, are all kind of pointing us in an interesting, in a new direction, or a coordinated direction. And a lot of that is causing headaches for food companies, and I'm sure is keeping Roberto and
Headaches or opportunities, Nick?
very busy with all the opportunities around reformulation. Um,
Yeah. So
so let me
just
start with that, and I've already
yeah,
got ideas.
you've already prompted about a dozen questions in my mind, but
There we go.
let's go back to your first one, the GLP-1 tsunami, which people still some of our clients and some of the folks I talk to at food companies still talk about GLP-1 coming, and I'm saying it's here.
Yeah.
It's only going to get bigger. So, and of course, food companies are getting, giving out different messages, how they're managing that. From your perspective, as a food company, what should they be thinking about with this GLP-1? So let's just say, yes, it's coming, it's going to get bigger. When the patents expire, it's going to probably double as the prices come down. And
Yeah.
what should
So,
we be
so
thinking?
Well, I think you've nailed quite a few points there. I mean, I think it is here now, and I think there was a Gallup poll either yesterday or this morning, which was saying 1 in 9 American adults are currently taking these drugs. 11% of the adult population, 15% have tried them. So that tells you it's already here, and it sounds almost a little odd to say that we're still at the beginning of this journey as well. We've only really just seen the start of these drugs. And as you say, um, we're moving from injections to the much more convenient pill form. The costs have come right down. You can start these drugs at something like $150 a month. At the start of this month, they opened up through the Bridge program into Medicare. So the actual user base is going to change dramatically. So rather than having people who could afford to buy these drugs out of pocket, we're now seeing people be able to just spend $50 a month. So the first thing that I guess food companies need to do is just stay mindful that we're very much at the beginning of this.
Mhm.
If the scientists are still struggling to understand how these drugs work on the body and all the other kind of benefits beyond weight loss,
Well, we'll find out 20 years from now, right?
but we're going to start discovering, and it may well be that the weight loss, when we look back in 20 years or even 5 years, the weight loss may be the least interesting things around these drugs. But right now, it's about user base. It's about who's making decisions about purchasing food. If they're on these drugs, will it affect the wider household? And more data that needs to come forward about how people's shopping habits change. And so I think the whole kind of number of different scenarios about how this may play out. I mean, the most cynical person, and maybe it would be saying something like, well, look, most people don't even stay on these drugs. I think the medium duration is 170 days or something. So they're just like any other diet phase, any other fad, and people come off them. And so nothing new to see here. Whereas those you could go total existential threat, and this is going to transform the industry because the user base is only ever going to get larger and bigger. People are going to consume less food and pay more attention to the types of foods they're eating.
So as food product developers, though, what should we be working on differently? I mean, what kind of foods will people be looking for? Since let's face it, a lot of these people who are on the drugs, their diet wasn't that great to begin with, as far as what they were eating. Now they're eating less of probably not great stuff. I don't know. Tastes have changed. So I'm
So
a food
it's, yeah,
product
so a
developer.
number.
What should I be thinking about? Should I be
Well,
thinking
shall I
about
make a
protein or
stab?
fiber?
Yeah,
Go
shall I
ahead.
make a stab and then pass it on to Maria and Roberta? I mean, I think again, it's understanding why people are on these drugs. Like, are they people who are taking them because they have a particular short-term weight goal, and so they're planning to be on them for a limited amount of time? Are these people who are supposed other people out there, presumably, who are trying to correctly use the drugs as they were intended for the long-term treatment of a chronic condition and plan to be on them as forever drugs and trying to make lifestyle changes at the same time. Um, it is interesting. I mean, I think those are a couple of the points. The other one is these drugs are so effective in weight loss
Mhm.
that you're supposed to change your lifestyle at the same time. But when you take the drugs, they seem to work by themselves, which kind of reduces one's need to kind of change things by themselves, which I think is a big problem as well.
Say more
The
about
other
why
point,
that's a problem, Nick.
I'm sorry.
Say more about why you think that's a problem, that they're not changing, that they're not doing anything else other than
Well,
just.
I think it's the sustainability of these drugs, right? It's they were only ever meant to be an adjunct to support for the long-term management of obesity. And so the idea was that you were to make lifestyle changes and changes to your diet as well, which for a lot of people would be sufficient to lose weight, but doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. And so the idea is that if you're just relying on a medical solution and not changing everything else, the minute you do come off these drugs for whatever reason, whether it's the side effects or they just prove to be too expensive, then suddenly you're going to be in a worse situation, because suddenly you've lost that medical support, in your diet.
Okay. Well, let's let Roberta and Maria talk a little bit about because even if we're not getting briefs at CJB and Associates for, hey, we're worried about GLP-1, what should we do? We seem to have no shortage of briefs for more protein. And I do know that that is often cited as something that people on GLP-1 drugs need to be concerned about, whether how true that is or to what extent, I'm not clear. But what I do know is we get a lot of protein briefs, and I'll turn it over to Maria and Roberto just to talk about kind of what they're seeing on that protein front.
Well, there for sure is a hunger for protein, and we've seen protein in not only this year, but I'm going to say in the past couple of years, getting stronger and stronger. And they want protein everywhere. They want protein in drinks, protein in snacks, protein in meals. I think there is a correlation of GLP-1 to protein. Whenever you're taking the drug, your appetite reduces. So you need substance. You're eating less, and Carlos, to your point, is are you eating less, but is that less, but still bad food, or is it high quality nutrients? So I think that's one of the reasons. At some point, we also should touch on fiber, which I think it's second to protein. But to answer your question, I think protein is pretty much everywhere, and it's so big that the raw material itself has doubled in price in the last year. So that's also something to consider.
And well, adding to the point of Roberto, I would also say that people are not looking only for protein, but for the quality of the protein and for the sources of protein. There are like a lot of different sources of protein, pea protein, MPI, whey concentrate. So you have to look at the quality of the protein to see what kind of product do you have. And also a lot of a brief come with a fiber. So you have to mix the fiber intake with your protein intake so you can have a really good product for the market.
And by the way, MPI is milk protein isolate.
Oh, yes, sorry.
No worries. We use a lot of abbreviations.
It
So
is interesting. Sorry, if I just add, Carl,
what?
I mean, the protein trend was already, well established
Oh,
before the
sure.
GLP-1s came. And so kind of teasing out what proportion of that demand is attributable to GLP-1s is super interesting. I think, and you guys would know this better than me, I mean, it's not enough just to eat more protein, right? Because you have to do resistance training or whatever to kind of make sure that the muscle, because the story is that if you're losing weight, then a third or up to a half of it is not the body fat. It's actually lean muscle mass, and so you consume more protein to help preserve that. But I don't think it's a case, and I'm not a nutritionist or scientist in this. It's not a case of just by simply eating protein that you're going to preserve your muscle mass, right? You have to work out and do resistance at the training at the same time. I'm not sure if that message is coming through as well.
I
And
think
when
to highly in tune consumers, of which is maybe a small percent of the population, the answer is yes. I think for most of the folks looking for protein, it's how many grams do I get? More is better.
yeah, and that's kind of one of the weaknesses I think of the whole protein trend to date is this it's just become a shouting match as to who has the largest number. It's
Mm.
not really about to Maria's point about the quality of the protein, and what's the intended use, because we know that the goalposts have changed around protein recently, right? Because the dietary guidelines have effectively doubled the recommended intake from what, zero point 0.8 to 1.2 to 1.6.
Mm.
But that really depends on like senior elderly people. There's an argument that they need more protein than the rest of the population, and so maybe a more targeted approach, maybe something we see coming down the line as well. So, like, what is this for? It's also interesting, and again, maybe you guys have a better view, is just to what extent these products need to be advertised, branded towards GLP-1 users, or is that going to be a turnoff in the marketplace? Because I do.
That's a really interesting question. Is it going to be a turnoff if you say this helps if you're on GLP-1 versus I am on GLP-1, I already know I need protein, leave me alone. I know from my days at PepsiCo with snacks, if we ever try to make them healthier, well, we did try to make them healthier, and we did. We did things like reduce sodium, eliminate trans fat. But if we flagged that and marketed that, sales would drop immediately because people didn't want to, I don't want to know about bad stuff. Just tell me the good stuff, right? And the good stuff is, I'm sure they were glad that the sodium was down and the trans fat was gone, but what they wanted was their indulgent, tasty snack. Talking about taste, so Roberta Maria, you're doing a lot with protein. We know that. I mean, from, as you say, snacks to uh, food items to beverages, even to sauces. So it does seem like I can't think of anything we haven't run into yet. Coffee's got protein now. I mean, it's incredible. But we're, in the food and beverage business, we also know that taste matters. And I think sometimes people forget that. So talk to me a little bit about as you formulate these higher protein briefs, whether it's a snack bar, a snack chip, a beverage, how do you deal with it still tasting good? Because if you put in too much protein, there are all kinds of organoleptic challenges, right? I mean, it can have an off taste, it can taste chalky. So how do you manage that?
Well, that's really interesting, Carlos, because it's not only the flavor, but it's also the texture, which has protein has a heavy impact on the texture of when you're formulating products. We do understand why, to Maria's point, MPI or milk protein isolate or whey protein concentrates are more expensive in the market than, let's say, pea protein, rice protein, X amount of proteins. And it's because of the flavor. It gives you a better flavor, and besides the flavor, the aftertaste. That's some of the issues that you get with plant-based proteins. You get an aftertaste, and you get a sense of dryness in your mouth after eating those sort of snacks, which to mitigate those issues, we're trying to create matrices to try to reduce the price, because that is also an important factor. What is the acceptable price point of, let's say, a high protein snack?
And also, well, I think adding to Roberto's point, that if you only use, for example, milk protein isolate or milk protein concentrate or whey protein concentrate, you can have an issue with dairy. So you have to look up for the allergens in there. So that's why a lot of companies are moving towards, well, pea protein, potato protein, or vegetable proteins, so they don't have this allergen issue. But with this, you have the taste and the texture, well, that these kinds of protein have. So that's another issue to look up for.
Well,
And
that's
to
what keeps
manage,
you busy, right?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
to manage the flavor, that's an important thing to talk about, because it depends. Because if you're working on a chocolate dairy-based bar, it's easy to add milk protein isolate in there because it kind of makes sense. But if you're working on a savory snack, uh, that changes everything. So you need to figure out how you're going to address that, probably with the right seasoning, right flavorings, and how to pair to make sure that you have an experience that at least makes sense to the consumer.
Do you find some seasonings that you tend to go to help mitigate some of the off flavor or the uh, the impacts of having so much protein in a snack product?
Oh, for sure. But it's not as easy as A equals B, depending on the matrix that you're working on and also on the process. Because if you're frying, it's a completely different experience than if you're baking. So I think there are ways to mitigate those flavors, but it depends on the matrix that you're working on, and the process also takes part in the equation.
Okay. I also know that when you're processing products like extruded products with protein, that's a whole nother set of challenges, right? Because things don't expand the same way with protein. But we'll save that for another seminar. Let's go back to our expert, Nick Fereday. And I don't want to spend the whole time on GLP-1. We've already used about a third of the panel. So let's move to another one of your favorite subjects, maha.
Thank you.
And it's it's obviously everybody knows about it in the food business. I think not everybody is quite sure what the impact is. Sometimes it changes, but I think most people would agree that Americans should be eating more healthily. And I'd like to hear from you, Nick, what you think that means, not just from your take, but how people are receiving all the information and publicity around MAHA, including the nutritional guidelines.
Yeah. So I'm not going to argue with eating more healthily. I don't think anyone will object to that. Look, I mean, I think he came in with a lot of momentum and excitement back last January, and promising to deliver lots of different things. And at the federal level, as I said at the start, it doesn't strike me that they've delivered on very much at all. And partly that could be that their approach is not to regulate. It's not their ideology, if you like, and so it's more about voluntary agreements, such as cutting out the artificial colors from food, and proposing the new dietary, giving us the new dietary guidelines, to help with education. But on other things like a definition on ultra processed foods, like closing the GRAS, what they call the GRAS loophole, or tightening up,
Mhm.
what is how food additives are regulated. There has been a lot of inaction, if you like. We were promised some of these things earlier this year, and they've yet to deliver. And so at the federal level, we're still kind of waiting to see the full ramifications of some of this. And similarly, the strategy document they came out with back last August seems somewhat of a damp squib, and hasn't really been implemented in any way as far as I can see.
Say more
But they
about that grass loophole that they're trying to close, because I'm not sure everybody in the who's listening to this is familiar with what that means.
So you may have a more tighter explanation than I, but a lot of additives, ingredients that are used in food are not necessarily fully tested before they're put into the food system. And so a lot of food companies have the ability to self-affirm the safety of a
Mhm.
particular additive or ingredient, and which are then not independently verified by the FDA, or not even having to submit evidence of their safety. And so it's made worse by the fact that the FDA hasn't, as far as I'm aware, kept a real track of all these different ingredients. And so you do get some rather, kind of incredible claims about there's thousands, if not tens of thousands, of additives and ingredients that have been added to the food system, and we know absolutely nothing about them. We don't know who approved them, and the safety of these things. And the contrast is always made to the tighter regulations in Europe, where this would not be permitted. And so there's a kind of a danger or fear about the lack of transparency, and what these additives may be doing or not doing to our bodies.
No, fair point. And obviously, a lot of consumers at least express concern about that. I guess the question, and in your opinion, is so what? Are people going to change what they eat? Are they going to stop, you know, going
Well,
for food
I
that,
think, yeah,
according to Maha, they shouldn't be eating?
so. I think they may, because certainly with the help of technology now, consumers have more firepower, and I think the best example of that is these nutrition profiling systems,
Mm.
or apps such as the Yucca app, YUKA, which has, I'm told, about 25 million users in the US. And so if you have an app on your phone, you scan the product, and it will give it a rating, and it will tell you, according to their algorithm, and we could talk about the quality of their algorithm, about certain additives and whether they're red flags or not. And where it gets interesting, Carlos, it's, when the red flag comes up, a lot of people put these products back on the shelves, and they don't purchase it. But what they can do is they can, press another button on the app, and post a comment on social media, the homepage or whatever of this particular product or brand, saying, I'm not buying your product because it contains additive X or sweetener Y. And this has been proven to be, certainly in Europe, a very powerful tool for reformulation.
Hmm.
Um, and so this is where it gets interesting, right? This is where the consumer has a direct hotline, if you like, to the food company. And if enough people are pressing, the unhappy button here
Hmm.
and posting on social media, then it has been proven to make changes to formulations of food products in Europe. And certainly Conagra and other companies here have spoken about that.
I think yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I think certainly food companies have spoken about it. And I think it's still in the early stages, my thinking, as the impact it's going to have, but something that certainly food companies should be aware of. Now, I can tell you, we do get briefs, but even before Maha and Yuka, we were getting briefs for extremely clean label
Mm.
products. And sometimes these briefs are quite demanding. I mean, from organic, clean label, I haven't heard much about provenance lately, like where does it come from? But
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe we'll get there. I think maybe that's something in the past. But there's so many of these stipulations. I guess one thing I have to ask you is, will people still enjoy eating food, or is it going to just become so medicinal?
Yes, well, that's another really interesting question. I mean, the pleasure of food, and to what extent this is off-putting, because as you said at the start, taste trumps, and you could add into that the affordability of some of these things as well. But I think that there is a danger that we do make food by all these regulations somewhat boring. Um, and it does, to what extent does it make put attention away from food to other aspects of one's health? Because we know that people are getting very excited about wearable technology, taking supplements, and we've seen companies buying food, like Gruns with Unilever, kind of moving into that space. And right out there on the more unregulated side is, a day doesn't go by without people talking about the use of peptides
Oh,
in
yes.
improving their health. And it's not to say that food isn't unimportant, but it does make me think that some of the attention around food and health is being maybe migrating to other parts of the supermarket, if not other sectors of the economy. But hopefully food does remain enjoyable.
Well, since
Um,
we're talking about things like Yucca and concern over food ingredients, let me ask Roberto and Maria to step in because we get a lot of what we call guardrails on the briefs that we get for products. And it's usually, it used to be just give me the Whole Foods no-no list, but most of, I would say, the briefs we get are really zeroing in on specific items. So I would just ask Roberta and Maria, like, what are you seeing as typically or very often things that say, make us a great tasting, name the product, but it's got to follow these guidelines and these guardrails.
I think the first one is without sugar. We've been hearing a lot of without sugar, and that also raises a question. I mean, sugar, it's a very difficult ingredient to replace. But there are some alternatives in the sweetness level, but there are other things that sugar gives you that you have to mask. And in order to give all those variables that sugar gives you, you need to add more ingredients, and that's how your ingredient list ends up being way too long, which is another concern. So at the end, the question raises, I mean, what is worse, adding sugar or adding all these lists of extra ingredients to try to replace that sugar?
Mm, yeah, you're right. We do get a lot of no sugar, low sugar. That's not new, but perhaps there's more intensity behind it. Uh, and we get no shortage of technology kind of based companies telling us that they've got the next solution for, getting rid of
it,
sugar. And
it
I
is
gotta
interesting
say,
balance.
after, I mean, stevia was the great hope pretty
Yeah.
disappointing, but I assume at some point somebody will crack the code.
It is interesting how the low sugar, no sugar has really become embedded with the consumer, right? And it would be worth, I don't have the answer, but it would be worth, food companies looking at that. Like, what was so powerful about that message that it seems to have, like, become part of everyone's mantra about what is healthy? Because it wasn't always the case, right? Because back in the day, the concern with sugar was always like it rots your teeth, and no one talks
Right.
about them,
That's right,
right?
because we have fluoride.
Um, and one of the constants that I've seen in my 30 years, looking at food is that there's always a new sweetener on the market, right? There's always this kind of perennial search for the holy grail, and none of them, to your point, stevia being the most recent example, ever seem to deliver. And the obvious solution is not the answer is sugar, but probably just less sugar is the solution,
I
right?
think that makes sense. Maria, do you see any guardrails that come up besides sugar or low sugar or
Yes,
no sugar?
yes, I would say MSG is another one of them. And for example, once we receive the brief of a product, I always try to keep the recipe or the formulation as simple as possible, because I think if you give to a client something that it's simple and also a consumer can understand it better, and maybe it would sell better. But I would say also MSG is another ingredient that a lot of people are trying to avoid right now.
Hmm. Okay.
That's sodium glutamate, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So let me just
calories
pause
is
because
another.
we do have a question from the audience, and this is coming from Pratik, who a good friend of ours. And as consumer expectations continue to evolve with demand for cleaner labels, better taste and texture, and products that fit GLP-1 driven eating habits, where do you see the future of plant-based foods? And how significant will price be, especially in today's inflationary environment? Well, Pratik knows my answer, but I'm going to turn it over to Nick for that one.
Yeah, that's funny. I was talking to a client earlier today, and I was explaining how 3 or 4 years ago, it was I would do a consumer trend survey, and I would start off on plant-based, and plant-based would just hijack the rest of the conversation because it elicited so much emotion. It was people took it very personally, or they just thought it was the best new thing. Um, so yeah, the plant-based thing is really back to the drawing board in lots of ways, right? It's learning, what went wrong, after initial spurt of success during COVID, and how a lot of the sales have just like been in perpetual decline ever since. So I think it is a back to the drawing board, and you know, going back to maybe less of the imitation around meat and more about the promoting the benefits of plants. Because as you all know, there's thousands, hundreds of years of culinary history of using of vegetarian diets to tap
Right.
into, and yet we seem to have focused on trying to recreate meat with a incomplete toolkit. Um, and so maybe that needs to be parked, and explorations around vegetarian diets.
But it's interesting because if we had this panel, maybe even as recently as 2 years ago, I'm guessing this would have been one of your top three. And I don't even know if it made your top 10.
It was certainly, it did seem, at the time, certainly one of those rapid changes, but it was the kind of how it came off so quickly certainly caught everyone by surprise. And then it seemed less like as a surprise when it became, when you started to think about it. Well, if you're forgetting about taste and you're forgetting about price and you're asking people to eat something that doesn't taste as good as meat and costs twice as much, then maybe it's not such a sure thing. Um, but it is, when I've seen it more recently, it is interesting how certainly a lot of the plant-based ingredient providers are really talking up the plant protein story,
Sure.
rather before, and that makes sense as
Well,
well.
as you know, we have a lot of experience, close experience with plant-based products. And I can tell you, I think taste was a big turnoff. And my own take is that people don't want to eat technology, they want to eat good food. And certainly technology can be a great enabler to making great food, but it has to be the enabler, not just because it's cool technology or, fermentation technology. There's so many wonderful technologies out there, and I think the message is out there to the companies, and I see a lot of startups around the world that are trying to say, okay, we've got this great technology, but it's not enough that it's cool. It's got to really make the product taste good and be affordable, as you say.
Mm.
And so maybe I'm just an eternal optimist, but I do see after the initial sort of euphoria of plant-based, it's going to slowly come back. In some ways, you saw that story with organic way back in the day when people thought it was a fad, even back in the 60s. And then every decade you hear the same thing, that reality is it's outpaced the growth of the rest of the category 2 to 1. And I think we're still seeing plant-based over the long haul has grown, and probably more so in Europe and outside of the US, but even in the US. I mean, look, who was drinking oat milk, 5 years ago?
For sure. Certainly the plant-based milks have done very well. Do you think there's a role for blending of plant-based and meats? Or is that
My personal opinion,
like mixing your
you're
beers?
either fish or fowl. I mean, I know, and I've seen it. It's kind of like the half calf, sodas.
Yeah, no one
On
wants
paper,
50.
it makes great sense. Yeah, okay. I'll give you half or half, half calories. It's like either give me zero or the full thing. And I think we've seen that play out, right? I mean, nobody's nobody's heard of Coke 50%.
C2, I think they called it, right?
Coke Zero, on the other hand, Pepsi Zero, they seem to be the ones. So anyway, we'll see. And it is interesting though that it just how quickly it fell off. And it kind of goes back to another question I have for you, and don't worry, we'll get to the ultra processed. These, it's not exactly fads. It's sort of like what's hot, you know?
Mm,
Back, and I think you remember back in, gosh, a few years ago when I was on the Wall Street Journal uh, Food Forum panel, I was asked by the moderator, all about salt. I mean, that was dominating the
yeah.
subject. And at that time, I made the comment, well, look, there's a lot of stuff about salt, but really sugar is the next salt. And I think I was right. Now I don't know what's next. Is it going to be
Oh,
fiber?
I thought you were going to give us a prediction after sugar. But,
Okay, I will. It's fiber, right?
um,
And I think the challenge is, again, I don't know how acutely aware people are. There certainly have been products out there. I mean, look at Fiber One. That was a very successful product.
yeah.
And yet there's still a lack of fiber in Americans' diets. And
Yeah, I would be less. I mean, certainly it's having a moment in media attention
Mhm.
right now with the TikToking and fiber maxing. But we've had past excitement around fiber. We had interest in the microbiome when that was first discovered,
Sure,
like in
yeah.
2018. And you can probably remember the second Atkins at the early start of the
Oh, yeah.
2000s, the rush to take out refined carbs and all these wonderful dietary fibers were put in. But none of these trends have ever budged. To your point, the amount of fiber that the typical American adult consumes, which is 16 grams, right? Not the 25 to
Mm.
30. So I guess that, to be convinced that fiber is the next new thing and will make a difference, it's like, well, what's different about this new excitement around fiber that will actually cause things to stick? And, fiber will never be as sexy as protein. Right? Protein is muscle, and it's like how you look. And fiber
Yes.
is really about all the invisible benefits and the
Mm.
toilet and the rest of it. So it's kind of will always be less glamorous. And you can joke about that in the marketing, but that only takes you so far. And for most people, to kind of ramp up their fiber intake too quickly, will have rather unpleasant side effects, which will probably put them off, fiber or trying to fiber max rather than fiber optimize, perhaps.
Yeah.
So it's a little skeptical around that. And I would love to know what you or Roberto Maria think, because if protein is hard to reformulate with or formulate with, I'm sure fibers is even more challenging, no?
Oh, yes, and we have some even interesting stories where we've added too much fiber to products, and there's some guys that just enjoy trying our products, what we do at the lab. There's a guy that ate like 26 fiber cookies. You can imagine that he passed his afternoon. Uh, now, there are some concerns, not concerns, but things that we need to take into consideration on how much fiber is the adequate amount, because everybody is different, and everybody accepts fiber and takes fiber in a different way. To answer your question, yes, it's a little bit more complicated, but more in that sense, at least in my
But we
perspective.
do
But
we
yeah.
do get a number of our breeds do ask for a certain amount of fiber, so it is on the radar for sure.
Mhm.
Would you agree, Maria?
Yes, but as Nick said, you cannot fiber max. You need to find the optimum
Yeah.
amount of fiber everyone can take. As the indifference with protein, where you can put as much protein as you want in a product. Here with fiber, there's a specific limit, or you will get gut issues. So yeah,
Yeah.
this is a different challenge here.
Talking about gut issues, I mean, it is interesting. Uh, Rachel Cheatham, who does a lot of these trends and meta-analysis of what's going on, and she'll see from year to year the top five, things always change, with one exception, gut health continues to be on consumers' minds, and so I think there is perhaps a under-realized opportunity to get more
Sure.
serious about that. And it kind of goes back to microbiome, but it's got to be real, right? I mean,
Yeah. And
anyway.
the benefits have to be, I mean, I think that's the challenge, right? We know all about prebiotics and probiotics and blah blah, but the actual hard evidence about what does a healthy microbiome look like, and how do you get that? It is still kind of largely we're not there yet. And so it becomes very hard. If the science isn't there, it becomes very hard for the consumer to have some,
Well, it's not just the science, it's you got to see the results, right? I mean, if if you're promised healthier outcome, how do you feel it as a consumer? Energy drinks work because, right? I drink a couple of, Red Bulls and I feel it, right? And
yeah.
so the immediate impact, the problem with some of these healthier recommendations is it may take days, weeks, even years to really, to fully
Yeah.
benefit. And if you're 20 something, I don't want to think about the benefits when I'm 60 something. I want to know, next week.
And it's always staggering what the adherence rate is for, medicine for chronic conditions. You would imagine it to be 100%, but it's actually quite, a lot lower than that because to your point, people don't see the daily benefit of taking a daily pill, right? It's something that, it's a long-term insurance, but you don't really perceive the benefit
Maybe
for
we
daily.
could do one more question from the audience. I think it's very relevant to what we're talking about. And that is what about the real role of healthier oils in food formulation? How the concept of healthier oil has changed in recent years, and do they relate with the GLP-1 of what a good diet is?
Is this a seed oil and tallow question?
I
Or
suspect that their seed oil is behind it, but I think it
yeah,
goes further than that. Go back to when fat was the enemy, right?
yeah,
And food companies responded very quickly.
yeah.
A lot of it was sugar. And then we kind of realized that,
Yes.
oops,
Yeah.
sugar,
Fine
sugar,
carbs. Yeah.
sugar converts to fat just fine. Thank you very much. Yeah. But it
Yeah,
certainly has changed
I
from,
thought it.
go
Yeah, I
ahead.
mean, the oil. Just thinking about Maha and RFK. I mean, obviously he has very strong views on seed oil and has been promoting, but roasting his or cooking his turkey in tallow and all of that and animal
Mhm.
fats and butter is back, blah blah. But it was super interesting that none of that came through into the new dietary guidelines, right? I mean, there was mention of a
Mhm.
wider base of oils, but there was certainly no vilification of seed oils in the way that we were expecting.
Do you
Um,
think the fact that we have very strong farming groups here in the US that grow a lot of those seeds
well, I
might have something to do with it?
certainly wasn't privy to those conversations, but I would certainly be persuaded that the ag lobby certainly seems to have more influence than the food and beverage lobby in DC right now.
Well, it's interesting because that didn't come up as one of the guardrails, but I can tell you, and I'm sure Maria and Roberto will agree. We got a lot of brace about switching, you name it, mainly snacks
Mm,
from a seed oil to not just a non-seed oil, but specifically avocado oil.
yeah. No,
And
it's super
it's
interesting.
expensive, you know? I
Yeah.
mean,
It's expensive, but it's also, this is a great example of where, the consumer makes up that, his or her mind about something way ahead of the science, or science takes a back
right.
seat even.
Mhm.
Because we know that the American Health Association recently re-endorsed, seed oils, for want of a better term. And
Yes.
and and then as a company, I mean, what the hell do you do if the consumers decided that seed oils are unhealthy? If
Yeah.
if if that becomes synonymous with what they define a healthy diet, then everyone's struggling with that, right?
Absolutely.
If you don't
Well,
support,
perception's reality when it comes to, what the consumer
yeah,
wants. And
and
we'll
sorry,
see. But yeah. Well, we only have a little bit of time left, and we haven't talked about ultra-processed foods. And so that was one of your top three. So tell me what's on your mind, Nick, and what.
yeah, I find it interesting how it's become such a black and white issue so quickly. And there seems to be a lot of dogma on both sides of the equation. When I first looked at it, it was like, scientists finding these correlations between, high consumption of ultra processed foods and poor health outcomes, and raising a question mark or putting a circle around, the level of processing. And I just thought that was really interesting because maybe it's adding, to what extent is that adding something new to the debate around, health and obesity and whatnot. And now it's just become this kind of, food fight, if you like, where food companies, if it's a stereotype, are like throwing up their arms. Well, everything's processed. What are you going to do?
You sound like
And
me. Okay.
and which was never the intention. And then similarly, um, again to the point around the consumer, and I certainly see this back in the United Kingdom, my home country, where UPFs, ultra processed foods, are now synonymous with unhealthy food, junk food, however you want to
So,
call
but
it.
where do you see this headed? I mean, I know you've got countries like Brazil that have already established, basically a rating system on what is ultra processed. How is that going to be decided? And how is that going to manifest itself? Because as you know, I mean, there are things out there that are not processed, but aren't necessarily good for you. And I don't
Exactly.
know how that gets reconciled.
Yeah, so it's not an either or in the sense that, to what extent having a processing filter on top of the nutrition filter and all the other things, to help define what is a healthy and unhealthy thing. But we can only do that, right? Once we know what the mechanisms are around ultra processed foods, and we don't really know that, right? I mean, we have thousands of, if not hundreds, sorry, hundreds, if not thousands of correlation studies proving, a positive correlation with poor health outcomes, which has been enough to persuade other jurisdictions to impose advice and regulations. But we haven't really got it to the heart of what the mechanisms are. I mean, there's talk of hyperpalatability and energy density, but we knew that already, and that's not
Right.
necessarily a function of processing.
Mm.
So wouldn't it be wonderful if the government and or others were spending time to work out what
Mm.
exactly is going on, if anything? And then once you know that, then you can have policy, right? And then you can make recommendations. But to have sweeping assumptions around what is essentially three-quarters of the supermarket is you can imagine all the unintended consequences of that, right? Um, and then we haven't even talked about food service and how it gets a pass on all of these things, but that's
Yes, that's right. Right.
for another story.
Although, sometimes change takes time, but happens. I mean, you go back, I don't know, at least 10 years, maybe 15, and the notion that you would have to post the calorie content of what's on the menu was very, let's say, only maybe a handful of states or jurisdictions would do that. And
Yep.
now it's gotten pretty common. And
Yep.
I don't know how much it has affected consumption,
Yeah.
but I think, my advice when, when food companies or food executives would ask me is all you're really doing is being transparent. So,
Mm.
I mean, probably most people are going to still order the 1,000 calorie, super burger if they want it. Some won't, that's true, but they probably weren't buying it to begin with. And at least they know. So,
Mm.
but that's calories, and it took a long time for that to come through. And of course, then there's always, yeah, but what if I eat three of those and all that? And it's kind of like with the 100 calorie snacks, which became hugely popular again about 10, 15 years ago, and people would just eat five of them. Anyway, we'll
And the
see what
Mrs.
happens with
Tropical.
ultra processed food and labeling and the definitions. I'm sure it will be controversial. I'm sure you'll be talking about it in your food insights newsletters and your take on it, which I certainly appreciate. So just with the remaining time, because we do need to start wrapping up, I'm going to ask you to predict, Nick. You've given
Thank
us
you.
your top three now. Let's say, I don't know, 2, 3 years from now, what are they going to be?
Oh, 2 to 3 years from now, we will absolutely still be talking about sugar reduction. It's kind of like the silent one now. But
Uh-huh.
I would say the thing I'm kind of most interested in around right now is this kind of the attention around health, moving away from food to other parts of either the supermarket or to other kind of categories. And whether that could be, so it's a very broad trend. So it would include the GLP-1s, it
Hmm.
would include peptides, but it would also include supplements and wearables. And so it kind of asks, the food question really is like, it's not that food will become irrelevant, but it's just like to what extent it may just become like a side dish as opposed to the main dish around health. So I think I think we're seeing some of that now, and I'm kind of very interested how food companies will respond to that and justify their presence, if you like.
And I think you're also right about peptides. That was something that some of my, let's say, more in tune friends, many from the supplement side and the food technology or ingredient technology, they were telling me about peptides, 8 years ago. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I think you're right. It's starting. I think most people, it's either right, whatever the latest TikTok trend is, but there does seem to be some real science behind peptides, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's a big part of the health trend that you're talking about. And as always, if you're going to put it in food, the question I would always have is, why are you putting it in food? Why don't you just take a peptide pill? And I think there would be some good reasons why it may make sense to be in a food
And
matrix, but we'll see.
ditto for fiber as well. It may be the easiest way to increase one's intake.
Very good. Okay, well, I really enjoyed the interview, Nick. You're always have a very insightful answer to any question, and I really appreciate you. I hope you continue publishing your insights on a regular basis because I find them fascinating, on trend, and pleasingly controversial from time to time.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Roberto, Maria, and until next time.
Guys,
Bye, Nick.
bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Recording on.